In our headlines on this Wednesday, December 31st, here in South Korea, e-commerce giant Coupang faces a second day of parliamentary hearing today as public backlash mounts over the company's handling of its massive data breach and more. Meanwhile, consumer prices here in South Korea rise at their slowest annual pace in 5 years this year at 2.1%, and the government vows to keep prices in check. And on the diplomatic front, President Lee Jae-myung's first overseas engagement in January 2026 is a state visit to neighboring China to partake in talks with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. We start with Coupang's second day at the Parliament for yet another hearing on this Wednesday as its interim chief Harold Rogers faces potential perjury charges. Our political correspondent An Sang-jin has the latest.
The National Assembly entered the second day of hearings on the data breach scandal at e-commerce giant Coupang, with the Science and Technology Committee reconvening them on Wednesday morning. Several other issues involving the company besides the data leak were on the agenda, including accusations of unfair business practices and poor working conditions. The hearing is being held jointly with 6 other committees. Key figures from Coupang, including founder and chairman Kim Bum-seok, have been absent from the hearings, sparking sharp criticism from lawmakers. During the Wednesday session, Coupang interim CEO Harold Rogers stated that the motive behind the personal data breach appeared to be an act of revenge stemming from resentment over being fired. He also added that the suspect stored only a small amount of data and deleted it afterward without sharing it with any third party. By the end of the hearing, the session is also to decide on whether to file charges of perjury against Rogers, after he said on Tuesday that the company was instructed by the National Intelligence Service to meet with the suspect behind the data leak. However, the NIS denied these claims, stating that it had never issued such a directive to Coupang, but rather had advised the company to make its own decision regarding the matter. While expressing its intention to pursue charges against Rogers over a statement, the NIS added that it only had requested material from Coupang as it had no authority to issue any commands or orders to the company. The hearings are set to continue as lawmakers further scrutinize the repercussions of the data breach and discuss potential regulatory changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. An Song-jin, Arirang News.
Also, on the local front, consumer prices here in South Korea rose at their slowest annual pace in 5 years this year at 2.1%. Our Eun-jin reports.
Consumer prices play a key role in gauging inflation. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, the Consumer Price Index for 2025 increased by 2.1% year-on-year, which is slightly above the Bank of Korea's inflation target of 2%. This figure marks the lowest such increase since 2020, when it was 0.5%. Inflation surged to 2.5% in 2021 before a huge hike to 5.1% in 2022 due to the impact of the pandemic, before moderating to 3.6% in 2023, then 2.3% in 2024. The Data Ministry said this month's inflation was mainly due to a sharp increase in petroleum product prices, which jumped 6.1% from a year earlier, marking the largest year-on-year gain since a 6.3% rise in February. The ministry added that prices of diesel surged 10.8%, while gasoline prices rose 5.7%, reflecting the impact of the weak Korean won. Year-on-year, petroleum product prices rose 2.4%, marking a return to an upward trend for the first time since 2022. A ministry official explained that because South Korea depends heavily on imports for energy, even though international oil prices have fallen compared with a year ago, rising exchange rates and a reduction in fuel tax cuts appear to have pushed up gasoline and diesel prices. Prices of agricultural, livestock, and fishery products climbed 4.1% in December, adding 0.32 percentage points to overall inflation. Imported beef prices increased 8%, the sharpest rise since August of last year. The Korean won remains among the world's weakest performing currencies, as it has over the past year. Meanwhile, the government said inflation could soon ease as foreign exchange rates stabilize, vowing to make every effort to keep everyday prices in check next year. Eun-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in the U.S., the Federal Reserve's decision to lower its benchmark interest rate earlier this month came after deep deliberation over the broader implications of the move on the U.S. economy. Our Lee Jae has details.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has released minutes from its December policy meeting on Tuesday, showing officials were more divided on interest rates than the final vote suggested. At the meeting, which took place on December 9th and 10th, the Federal Open Market Committee approved a quarter-point rate cut by a 9-3 vote, which marked the most dissenters since 2019. The move lowered the benchmark federal funds rate to a range of 3.5 to 3.75%. While most officials said further rate cuts would be appropriate if inflation continues to ease, the minutes show rising caution. Several policymakers argued rates should remain unchanged for a period after the December cut, and some who supported the move said the decision was finally balanced. Officials said the economy is growing at a moderate pace, but they see downside risks to employment and upside risks to inflation. The meeting also included updated economic projections, indicating one rate cut in 2026 and another in 2027, which would bring rates closer to 3%, a level considered neutral for growth. Some officials warned progress toward the Fed's 2% inflation goal may have stalled, while noting that tariffs under U.S. President Donald Trump are adding to inflation in the short term, but are expected to fade by 2026. According to recent data, hiring remains slow without a surge in layoffs. Inflation is easing, but still above target, and economic growth remains strong. However, policymakers cautioned that recent figures may be distorted by data delays linked to the government shutdown. Markets expect the FOMC to keep rates unchanged in the near term, as Fed officials offered little guidance during the holiday period and signaled caution heading into the new year. Lee Jae, Arirang News.
Back here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung has shared an unboxing video on social media that has been garnering quite a bit of attention as it offers a rare glimpse into a gift from his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump. Arirang Song Yu-jin files this report from the Blue House.
어디 한번 언박싱을 한번 해볼까요?
As President Lee Jae-myung opens the box, he reveals a golden key. President Lee posted this short video on social media on Tuesday, showing the gift he received from U.S. President Donald Trump.
백악관으로 가는 키. 백악관 문이 안 열리면 이걸로 열면 열린다는데 진짜인가 한번 확인해 봐야 되겠어요.
This comes after Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Hoon-sik unveiled that President Trump had sent the final one of 5 golden keys he personally designed, in return for what he called a meaningful gift from President Lee during their October summit in Gyeongju. At that meeting, Lee presented Trump with a replica of a golden crown from Korea's ancient Silla dynasty.
한국과 미국 간의 새로운 시대를 위해
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The 4 other keys are known to have been given to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former Japanese Prime Minister Taro Aso, Tesla CEO Elon Musk, and football star Cristiano Ronaldo. President Lee wrote that he hopes the gift will help unlock an even stronger ROK-US alliance, thanking President Trump for what he described as constant friendship and deep trust. So the symbolic gift exchange comes as President Lee wraps up 2025, a year that saw 2 summits with President Trump, as well as the release of the long-awaited joint fact sheet on trade and security. Eyes are now on how their personal rapport, as well as how the ROK-US alliance will evolve in the new year. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Well, in the meantime, President Lee Jae-myung's first overseas engagement for the new year is a state visit to neighboring China for talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung covers his agenda there.
President Lee Jae-myung will make an official visit to China, the first for a South Korean leader in about 6 years since former President Moon Jae-in's visit in December 2019. This marks the second Lee-Xi summit in just 2 months after they met during APEC in Gyeongju. According to the presidential office, President Lee will pay a state visit to China from January 4th to 7th, hold a summit in Beijing with his counterpart, and have a state dinner. Moving on to Shanghai, he plans to mark the historical significance of 2026, which will be the 150th anniversary of the birth of independence leader Kim Gu and the 100th anniversary of the Shanghai Provisional Government building. One expert says Yi's China visit will carry great significance in the restoration of bilateral ties.
The summit hints at the restoration of bilateral ties, which had been stalled for some time, and that the strategic cooperative relationship between South Korea and China is very important in the context of global geopolitics.
There will be many agenda items to cover, mainly the follow-up measures to implement the 7 MOUs that were signed during the previous summit for long-term economic cooperation. The same expert, too, says instead of other sensitive issues between the two countries, two leaders are likely to focus on economic cooperation.
The leaders are likely to discuss further accelerating the second phase of the Korea-China FTA negotiations and move beyond the previously stalled framework of cooperation and expand collaboration not in traditional industries of the past, but in more future-oriented industries.
Still, eyes are on whether discussions on the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula will take place, and whether China will explicitly include such language in its official statements. The meeting itself has reignited hope of China lifting its restrictions on Korean cultural content as well. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
K-screen productions continue to garner global popularity. According to Netflix, Season 2 of Culinary Class Wars topped the global top 10 for non-English shows for the second week in a row. The first episodes of the new season aired on December 16th and saw over 4.7 million views last week, topping charts in 4 Asian regions, including South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan. Similarly, the film The Great Flood ranked #1 in the global top 10 non-English movies with more than 33 million views. The disaster movie was released on December 19th and reached #1 in 53 countries, including in the US. And in this second installment of our stories to celebrate next year's milestone in diplomatic relations between Seoul and Paris, our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young sought out South Korea's top cultural official in the French capital city to learn about the importance of deepening awareness about culture to bolster bilateral ties. To take a listen.
No longer seeking mere recognition, Korea's cultural presence in France is becoming institutionalized. Beyond what's trending in popular music, film and content, Korea-related items are now appearing regularly at museums, heritage venues and major festivals. That's according to Lee, director of the Korean Cultural Center in Paris, who noticed a stark contrast from his student days in France more than 3 decades ago.
When I studied here 35 years ago, in most cases, people did not even recognize Korea as a country. But now, Korea's image and stature is incomparably higher. Korea is now treated at the level of an advanced country here, and France, in particular, has very strong cultural pride. Rather than economic advancement alone, they regard cultural awareness itself as a key indicator of being an advanced nation.
Korean participation in events such as the annual Avignon Festival is one such indicator, as well as the opening of the Pompidou Center in Seoul next year. With mainstream exposure to Korean culture in France initially coming through film, television dramas and K-pop, Lee says broader engagement between artists, professionals and government officials expanded cooperation over the past decade. His own career has focused on building Korea's cultural presence beyond the promotion of commercial trends.
In a place like France, raising overall cultural recognition matters. For long-term sustainability, building a serious, broad-based audience for literature, culture, and the arts is crucial, because people here live a culturally rich life from an early age, with high expectations. They eventually recognize that Korea also has classical culture, beautiful hanbok, traditional roof tiles, fermentation culture, deep history.
One major milestone came last year when France's education and culture authorities listed the Korean Culture Center as an approved destination under the government's subsidized Culture Pass scheme for students.
My dream is that the term Hallyu and even Korean Culture Center won't remain pronouns, but become common terms like Mecca or champagne spoken naturally by French people from children to the elderly.
The center hosts art exhibitions, pansori performances, Korean film screenings, and public talks with prominent authors throughout the year. Korean language classes and hands-on workshops offer training in ceramics, cooking, calligraphy, and handicrafts. With such entry points, Lee says his mission is to make the wave of Hallyu sustainable through discovery.
Our center hosts a countless number of clubs, playing an incubator role to nurture and motivate aficionados so they voluntarily seek out, learn, experience, and discover Korean culture.
Lee says special initiatives have aimed to promote a deeper understanding of Korea's heritage over time rather than focus on one-off events. Around the time of the Paris Olympics, a 6-month program explored Korea's concept of 놀이, or recreational culture, by sharing music, performance, and everyday cultural practices.
This showed how Korea's culture of play connects to its history and identity, and how Korea's dynamism and creativity didn't appear overnight. Being able to help French audiences experience this has been deeply rewarding.
Since Lee's appointment in September 2022, the Culture Center has carried out nearly 250 programs and projects across France.
I want this center to be a place where people see, enjoy, and experience Korea, but also a cultural landmark in Paris that anyone would want to visit at least once. We're laying the first stones little by little, and I'm confident we can see that through.
Going forward, as preparations move ahead for the 140th anniversary of diplomatic relations, Lee hopes to continue unfolding new dimensions of Korean culture, its spirit, imagination, and sources of inspiration. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Paris.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Winter holiday travel between the UK and continental Europe was disrupted on Tuesday due to a power failure in the Channel Tunnel. Eurostar cancelled trains linking London with Paris, Brussels, and Amsterdam before partially resuming services later on Tuesday after the tunnel reopened in limited capacity. Eurostar warned the power fault was still ongoing and told passengers to postpone trips because severe delays and last-minute cancellations remained possible. Tunnel operator Getlink said repairs were underway and traffic was slowly being restored in both directions. It said it saw no sign of foul play or sabotage. The grandchild of former U.S. President John F. Kennedy, environmental journalist Tatiana Schlossberg, has died at the age of 35 after she was diagnosed with leukemia last year. A family statement announcing her death was posted on Tuesday by the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. It did not disclose the cause of her death. Schlossberg wrote that doctors diagnosed her with acute myeloid leukemia in May 2024 after a high white blood cell count was noticed while she was in the hospital for the birth of her second child. In a recent essay in The New Yorker, she described chemotherapy, 2 stem cell transplants, and clinical trials, and criticized the policies backed by her relative, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In Germany, a daring bank heist has left police scrambling for answers and around 2,700 customers out of pocket. Authorities in the city of Gelsenkirchen say thieves drilled through the vault wall of the Sparkasse Bank early Monday, stealing property worth between 12 and 106 million US dollars. A fire alarm alerted officers around 4 a.m. on Monday, leading them to discover a massive hole in the basement wall of the branch, and the vault ransacked. Witnesses reported seeing men loading large bags into a vehicle, but the suspects remain at large as investigators comb through forensic evidence from the scene. New York City is ramping up security ahead of its Times Square New Year's Eve celebration. At a press conference in Times Square on Tuesday, Mayor Eric Adams said authorities had no specific or credible threats tied to the event, but declared it a heightened threat environment and urged the public to report anything suspicious. Security teams will implement secondary screenings inside crowd pens to ensure the safety of the millions of expected attendees. A new historic twist was also revealed, a second dropping of the Constellation Ball. The ball will drop at midnight to ring in the new year and again in July 2026 to mark America's 250th anniversary. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
On the very last day of this year, a powerful cold wave has settled in, and with that, cold wave warnings have been expanded and strengthened across the country. Cold wave advisories are also active in Seoul and much of the country's central region, eastern parts of Jeollabuk-do and northern parts of Gyeongsang-buk-do province. Brace yourselves on New Year's Day for an even stronger cold spell. The feels-like temperature in Seoul will plunge to minus 15 degrees Celsius tomorrow morning. Many of you may be wondering if we'll be able to see the first sunrise despite the cold. It will be mostly clear across the Seoul metropolitan area, Gangwon-do, Chungcheong-do, and the Gyeongsang-do provinces, making for the great sunrise viewing. If you're heading out to enjoy the sunrise, please make sure to bundle up for a sub-zero cold morning. Highs will remain cold with Seoul reaching minus 4 degrees, Gwangju and Daegu at 0 degrees. From tomorrow through Saturday, snow will fall frequently in the Jeollado provinces and on Jeju Island. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.